Hey guys, multi-season challenger and former rank 1 Syndra player here with an updated Syndra guide for 2025. Enjoy. Alright, we're going to show you every single possible room page for Syndra today. We're going to be starting off with the most common, which is going to be the First Strike page. The idea behind First Strike is when you're locked into a boring matchup with no gameplay conditions, you can just scale for free. So if you're playing against something like a Galio, a Vladimir, a Rise, champions that you don't necessarily have solo kill potential on in the early game, you can just get free gold for existing. So we're going to lock in First Strike. The next two options we have are Magical Footwear and Cashback. If you're in a matchup that requires early boots to dodge skill shots to space against melees, or just in general to rotate around the map, you probably shouldn't take Magical Footwear. If you're in an AFK scaling matchup where you're doing literally nothing at all, then you can take Magical Footwear for free move speed and 420 gold of value. I typically run Cashback in almost every game that I play. It's going to give you 1,000 gold over the duration of the game, but the main purpose of it is really just to segue into expediting your items as fast as possible. So they have two completely different purposes. They're both fantastic. It just depends on what your preference is and whether or not you actually need the boots early on. And then finally, we have our third row, which is pretty much always going to be triple tonic. It gives us 3 different elixirs at level 3, 6, and 9. The cool thing about the elixir skill here is it actually gives you splinters for activating it, so it helps you hit 100 splinters for the execute. The elixir of avarice helps you hit your early items faster, and elixir of force actually gives you soul kill potential at 6 when you get your unleashed power, which is fantastic. And then finally, we have choice between Cosmic Insight and Jack of all trades. I run Jack of trades in every single game that I play just because it's very easy to hit that first threshold, which gives you some extra adaptive force and more ability haste, which just makes it easier to lane in general. Cosmic Insight used to be very common, but with the changes to Ludens, there's not really a great reason to play for item haste. The Summoner spell haste is still good, but let's say that you're running Blackfire Torch and Cosmic Drive. None of those items are affected by item haste, so it's kind of a dead stat. But, you know, flash cooldown is always going to be fantastic, as well as teleport. I'm going to run Jack of all trades. Secondary page here is going to be Transcendence for additional ability haste. And finally, Gathering Storm. If we're playing First Strike, we're pretty much always going Gathering Storm. You technically could still take Scorch for early laning resource control, but it's just synergistic effect between scaling and scaling. The difference between Scorch and Gathering Storm is Gathering Storm will always have more value after 20 minutes. But most of the time, your game will be determined by 20 minutes, which is why Scorch lets you actually win the lane. It just depends on how you're playing the game or whether or not the resources matter. Because if I take Scorch against a champion that has infinite sustain, there's no point in controlling the resources. Finally, ability haste, adaptive force, and scaling health, or flat health depending on the matchup. And that is going to be your most common page, which will be Scaling Syndra. This one's going to be fun because we have 3 different keystone possibilities for sorcery as our primary. If we're playing against a short to mid-range champion where we're going to be trading every 6 or so seconds, Aerie is going to be our best in slot because it's flexible, it has a low cooldown, and it gives us infinite presence and uptime. If we're playing against a champion where we are only trading every 15 to 20 seconds around our QE cooldown because we're outranged or similar range, Comet is going to be your go-to keystone. It's got higher base damage, but the cooldown starts at 20 seconds at level 1, so it's not going to be as flexible as everything else. They both proc on a singular spell, which is nice, but Comet really does rely on you landing a slow or stun to guarantee the damage going through, which is why it's a little bit less consistent than Aerie. And then finally, if you are in a matchup that requires you to reposition a lot, then you would take Phase Rush. I would probably run Phase Rush in maybe 5% of the games that I play total. Aerie probably in 20 to 30%, and you could technically get away with First Strike in 100% of your games just because of how good it is, but optimizing your keystone for your game is going to give you a higher chance of success. I would typically only run this into a lot of melees that are going to be constantly CCing me, or if I need to reposition against a melee champion like Echo, Galio, it just makes it easier to space. Now, for the most common aggressive room page, it's going to be Aerie. Your second row is going to be Axiom Arcanist or Manaflow Band champion. Sorry, Manaflow Band. The main difference here is that Syndra has a mana passive. You're never going to run out of mana if you're playing the game effectively, which means that you have free access to increased damage on your ultimate, as well as cooldown. So I personally run Axiom Arcanist if I'm playing very aggressively. But if you're below the rank of Emerald, I probably would still recommend going Manifold Band just because it gives you a lot of mana sustain and you can make mistakes and not be punished by it. But as you increase your skill cap, you are going to want to play the game as optimized as possible, and you're going to get value out of Axiom Arcanist. But if you're in a wave clear matchup, like against a Malzahar, you'd be going First Strike anyway, so I guess it doesn't matter. Third page, Transcendence again, ability haste is broken. It's fantastic. Final rune is going to be Scorch. If you're playing aggressive and to win lane at level 1, you're not going to be taking Gathering Storm, you're going to be taking Scorch. For secondary runes, you have two options. You can go Precision Secondary. You can take Legend Haste, and again, this is basic ability haste. It only applies to our Q, W, and E. Does not apply to our ult. So we take Legend Haste and Coup de Grace or Cut Down. Most of the time it's going to be Coup de Grace, just for the additional, damage, adaptive, and flat HP, since it's assuming you're early game scaling or fighting. You can also take Attack Speed if you're going to be trading a lot of autos in those early levels. And the secondary option is if you're playing against something like a Zed, a Fizz, where it's a lot of high action volatile damage, like LeBlanc per se, you can go Bone Plating and Overgrowth just for some additional tank stats to make it a little bit harder to kill you. And of course, if you're playing against early game champions, you always want the flat health to deny their win con of snowballing through kills. And if you're playing in a matchup where you're not going to be taking as much damage and you just want the extra damage to kill them, then you can run Scaling Health. Welcome to the item portion of this video. We have 3 common builds for Syndra currently. First off, we have the most commonly built, which is Blackfire Torch. This build is just broken because of the way that Syndra's kit works for true damage on your W and your ultimate having an execute at 100 splinters. This effectively lets you skip a penetration item second for free that other champions require and focus on utility stats before building Rabadons or Void Staff. The meta currently favors bruiser compositions, which means fights will always last longer due to their increased health pools and resistances. Blackfire Torch is great for longer fights because we get more DPS over time from the burn, and it also generates AP for every target afflicted. If you're tagging multiple players in a fight, you're getting 12% AP for free just for existing. If we built burst items into a bruiser, we wouldn't be able to one-shot them, so this build is instead optimized to do damage over time and give us utility for kiting. Syndra has an insanely high amount of damage, so you can build this even into squishy teams and get great value. Syndra typically with the normal build overkills targets by a lot of damage, so by instead investing our money into utility stats, we become more oppressive at the cost of early game snowball potential. Once you complete Cosmic Drive, you'll typically have enough damage to one-shot a squishy target regardless, meaning you're not suffering from overkilling a target by 500 damage, and you just have infinite move speed and infinite haste. In terms of boots, I think Swifties are fantastic because they're great for spacing both offensively and defensively. It lets you stay in range of a target that you're running down. It also lets you run away from a high mobility assassin that's running you down. If you need more damage, you can opt for Sorcerer Shoes, unless your team is majority magic damage, because then they'll be optimizing magic resist and it'll kind of be inefficient, and you'll build Swifties then. You can also still build Mercury Treads if you need them for survivability. For some reason, I always mess up on that word, but great for survivability if you're playing against a champion with high CC setup for ganks, if you're playing against a Lissandra, if you're playing against a LeBlanc, if you're playing against a Sejuani, things that are going to lock you down, you can just get the CC tenacity. Cosmic Drive second gives us even more move speed for staying in range, or disengaging while giving us a lot of extra health and haste to stay alive, or find more combos. Third item onwards, you should build Void Staff if the enemy's stacking magic resist items. Otherwise, you should build Rabadon's third for raw AP because it's synergistic with your entire champion. Rabadons and Void Staff are interchangeable for third and fourth slot. After that, you'll build a survivability item like Zianni's or Banshees as your final item. Or if you need even more damage, you can opt for Shadow Flame or Horizon Focus as your final item since they're both stat sticks. If you need more vision control against longer range champions that are hiding in Fog of War, then I would recommend Horizon Focus. The next build is for 3 or more squishies. Ludens gives us more early game snowball potential because of the item components giving us more damage. We also get 20 more ability power and a higher base damage passive. That comes at the cost of a higher cooldown compared to Blackfire Torch. We want to focus on penetration items to ramp our damage up. So we're going to build Penetration second. I personally prefer Storm Surge second because of the added mobility and the fact that Syndra suffers from overkill. Shadow Flame is perfectly fine as a second item if you prefer it. Shadow Flame's only issue is that it is a conditional passive that only works when the target is below 40% HP, so any trait above that value would not receive any benefit. If you're simply forcing one-shot all-ins on every single possible play, this wouldn't be an issue. Storm Surge is also technically a conditional passive because it has a cooldown and requires 25% damage to activate, but a standard combo from Syndra will always proc it. So the main difference is move speed. You get 6% move speed based on Storm Surge, which makes it a bit easier to get in range to catch your combo or to disengage, whereas Shadow Flame is all in on that AP value and the increased true damage. After a penetration item, we build Rapidons for raw AP, or Void Staff if the enemy's building a lot of magic resist. You will sometimes be forced to build Void Staff third anyways if your economy's low, because the components are a lot cheaper. If I can't reset with 1200 gold for Rod, the only way that you're getting stronger is by buying either a Blasting Wand or an Amp Tome to build into Blighting Jewel. Once again, Rabadons and Void Staff are interchangeable for third and fourth slot. Finally, our last item would be a survivability item like Zianni's or Banshees. If you need more damage, you can again opt for Shadow Flame or Horizon Focus. The final build I will recommend is the full penetration build where you skip a mana item entirely. This requires you to be incredibly efficient with your mana usage or swap out Axiom Arcanus for Mana Flow Band. The move speed and Magic Pin make it easier to access targets and finish them off compared to Ludens, and allows for a second penetration item to be immediately built for even more synergistic effects with your Sorcerer Shoes. The upside of this build is you are min-maxing your damage for snowball potential. The downside is its inflexibility. If the enemy builds magic resist, it pretty much falls off a cliff. Now, overkilling a target by 1000 damage could be considered a flaw, but it also means you can miss half your combo and still blow up a target, so I consider it a net positive. Sometimes you'll one-shot somebody with just your basic combo and that feels divine. I typically only build this if I'm solo AP and the enemy team just drafted like absolute trash. You can't go below 0 magic resist, so you'll purchase Rabadon's third, and then focus on survivability items before having the option of Void Staff as your last item. You can technically build Void third anyways if they're stacking MR or if your economy's low. Rabadon's is just a very good item and should always be the goal if the enemy allows it. Next up, we have Crypt Bloom versus Void Staff. I have a full video explaining it on my channel, so if you would like to see the full explanation, you can go watch that. But to keep it short, 10% Magic Pin against a low resistance team is effectively a difference of 4 to 7 Magic Pin. Instead, you can get Haste and a team-wide heal, which is pretty good. Some people prefer having the additional 25 ability power from Void Staff, but if you're able to include another spell into your combo from the haste you're getting, a minimum of 300 damage added to your combo. So the real question is whether you are playing your fights fast or slow, and whether or not the enemy team has a lot of magic resist to make that 10% matter, more or less. Zanyas and Banshees are situational items that can be slotted into our build at any given point, but they do have viable cases to be built second against certain compositions or teams. If you're playing against a lot of heavy CC engage and heavy AP damage like Sejuani, Ashe, LeBlanc, Leona, you can opt for Banshee's second to make you less accessible as a target. It just makes it harder for them to pull the trigger on you, and they have to actually focus on breaking the shield first or finding a way to combo you entirely. If you're playing against a lot of heavy engaged champions or high damage assassins like Zed, Fizz, Jarvan, Zanya's second works great to disrupt their combo or prevent the initial engage from stacking you out. So they're just pretty good items. Hey guys, welcome to the ability overview for Syndra. We're going to be showcasing all the cool techniques you can do and explaining the overall use case. Syndra's passive is actually very cool. It's called Transcendent, and the way it works is you collect up to 120 Splinters of Wrath, and once you hit certain thresholds, it'll upgrade her abilities and give you new and cool things that you can do with them. Now, there's 3 ways that you can collect Splinters. The easiest way is to damage enemy champions with 2 abilities, and then you'll see that there's a circle around the champion that will indicate the cooldown before you can collect another Splinter from them. So you will receive 1 Splinter until you're level 11, and then you'll receive 2, and then at level 18 you'll receive 3 splinters. So if you fall behind in splinters, it's not a terrible thing because you will get more as the game progresses, but the idea is that you're punished for bad gameplay and you're rewarded for good gameplay. The goal really in Syndra is to always have 40 splinters by the time you hit level 7 for the best possible kill potential, and then you want to hit 100 splinters around 20 to 22 minutes. So if you're consistently not hitting those goals, it's because you're either not trading enough or you're not collecting enough cannons or XP. Because there's 3 ways to collect splinters. The first one is damaging abilities with that 8-second cooldown. Spending a skill point will also give you 5, so it's not leveling up, it's the actual act of spending the skill point. So if I put a point on my ult, I'm going to go up to 46, and then we have the third one, which is killing a cannon minion. And the nice thing about killing cannon minions is it'll also give you a mana refund. So you're essentially rewarded for farming incredibly well. So those are the 3 main ways that you can collect splinters on Syndra. Now, you will upgrade your abilities at 40, 60, 80, 100, and 120. And the way that we're going to be maxing our abilities is Q, W, R, E. Now, we're going to go and introduce our first ability, which is going to be Dark Sphere. And Dark Sphere is the bread and butter of every Syndra interaction that you're going to experience. So the way that this ability works is that you can cast it while moving, and it's going to summon a ball that can then be manipulated by every other ability in your kit. So by itself, when you summon a ball, it's going to exist for 6 seconds. And the idea behind this is that the longer the ball's on the field, the more value you get from it, because you can then include it in your ultimate, or you can manipulate it with other spells. Because if I have 2 balls on the field, when I use my stun, I'm now sending 2 different stun projectiles. And if I were to ult and then E, that would give me 3 different stun projectiles, provided that I had my cooldowns enabled. So the more balls, the more action that you can get out of it. Now, once you upgrade your Q, you'll have 2 charges, which is then represented by these 2 orbs underneath your name. So this makes it easier to use a lot of your abilities, because initially when you're playing the game, the idea is that the basic trading combo is I'm going to QE the target, and then disengage off of the stun. But let's say that I'm not in range to land the Q1. Once I have 2 Qs, I can just use the Q1 to stun a target, and then follow up with my WQ. Because the way this champion works is that if you're not actually hitting them with the Scatter the Weak projectile, it'll still do damage once the ball connects with them. So you don't have to worry about hitting the actual cone to get damage from it. Now, the next ability we're going to be talking about is Force of Will. This is a very interesting ability. It has the most nuance out of this champion. But the way that Force of Will works is that you can pick up objects. You can pick up Scuttle Crab, you can pick up Jack in the Box, you can pick up Daisy, you can pick up Tibbers, you can pick up a ball. And when you pick up a ball, it will actually reset the duration of the ball. So it's a refresh, it's not an extension. So the moment I pick up the ball, it will then refresh to the 6-second duration that a ball would last. So by using Force of Will intelligently, we can keep a ball on the battlefield for longer, and then that makes it easier for us to hit higher threshold ultimates. Now, there are some cool tips and tricks that you can do with Force of Will. Something to keep in mind is that throwing your ball will actually give you vision of the target area, so you can use it to check bushes as you're rotating around the map. And then the other thing is that it will also slow a target whenever it hits. So a 25% slow will make it easier for you to land your QE if you're initiating with your W, and that's pretty nice. It also makes it easier for you to land pretty much anything that you want to do and stay in range for combat. Another cool thing with Force of Will is that when you put a ball on the ground, and you click W anywhere on the screen, it'll pick up the nearest object with priority for Dark Spheres. So if I'm in combat and I'm full stunning somebody, I can just click W immediately next to me to pick up the ball, instead of dragging my cursor to pick up the ball. Now, there are some cases where you do need to be precise with your mouse, because even though there is a priority for Dark Sphere, if I were to click right here, it'll pick up a minion instead of the ball, and then if I were to WE, I wouldn't actually get the stun. So you want to cast your W on the floor in proximity to where your closest ball is, but make sure that we're not accidentally picking up minions with it. Now, there are some pretty insane techniques that can be done with Syndra W. The most notable one is that when you pick up the ball, the standard way that it works is it travels behind you and then will come in tow. So if I click W, it'll go from here, it'll travel to me, and now the ball is trailing behind me. So if I were to throw this ball forward, it would throw itself over my back in a looping arc. So that takes a little bit of time for it to travel from behind me to where my target destination is. But if I were to instead cast the ball backwards, closer to the proximity of my target, it'll fly much faster. So a lot of times what you'll end up doing is you'll be in a fight, you'll QE, you'll pick up the ball, and then you'll basically just turn around and then fast cast it, because it always tries to fly behind you. But there is a way to consciously manipulate this to never actually be necessary, and this is probably one of the most unspoken mechanics that Syndra has. I'm not sure if a lot of people know about it, but it's one of my favorite things to do, and I'm going to go and give you a quick explanation. So, the reason why I think a lot of people aren't aware of this is because of the way that Quick Cast and Smart Cast work. So right now, this is what Quick Cast with Indicator looks like. And the way this works is when I release the key, it casts a spell. Whereas if I'm playing Quick Cast without indicators, the moment I press the key, it'll cast. So it's a very minute difference, but if you're somebody that tends to linger on keys or you're fat fingering things, there is maybe a 0.3 second difference between you actually casting an ability. And for this next tip I'm going to show you, it's very important that we are smacking the fuck out of our key. And I'm going to show you why. So like we talked about, when I activate my W, the ball will transport to behind my back. But I can intercept it and then immediately recast it to transmit it instantly during the flight. So as you can see, if I double tap my W, instead of waiting until it gets here, I can send the ball closer from the enemy to the enemy. So sometimes you can get what is a instant cast, where it'll legit teleport from my cursor directly to where the ball is. Sometimes the ball will travel further, but the faster you smack that key, the more often that you can get a favorable result. Because the less travel time, the faster the ball gets there, and then they're unable to dodge the damage. So if you're playing against a champion that's building tenacity and you max range stun, you pick up the ball, and then you throw it in a very slow tempo, you're giving them a chance to walk out of it or dodge it. But if I were to cast my QE, immediately double tap, and then teleport my ball instantly, just like that, you saw it teleport from here to here, that can never happen. So the goal is really just to get in the habit of being very confident of your W. As you can see here, it's not very consistent, but if I'm doing it incredibly fast, more often than not, I can get that fast teleport. And sometimes it'll still be a little bit slower, but it'll be faster than if I were to wait for the ball to teleport directly behind me. So this is probably one of the most interesting mechanics on Syndra, and probably the biggest difference maker on a lot of fights that you otherwise wouldn't win. So this is something that I would recommend getting used to. Make sure you're not playing with indicators, and just getting a very general idea of being confident. Because a big issue that I see with Syndra players is they're not confident, they wait for their abilities to land, and then they'll follow up. And that's precious time, because not only are you waiting for your cooldowns, you're not able to rotate through them as fast. Because if I do a standard combo, and let's say that I walk up, I'll wait, and then I'll follow up, that's almost an entire second before my cooldowns can actually start regenerating. And something I'll also see is that people are very inconfident, and they'll cast Q, wait for it to appear on the right target, and then cast stun. And against a lot of these champions, your projectile speed is going to be faster. You don't need to be waiting. You just need to be confident and precise with your mouse placement, because your projectile speed will not give them a chance to dodge if your mouse is accurately on them. But that is the coolest thing that you can do with Force of Will. I hope that you take advantage of it, because it's my favorite mechanic. The upgraded version of Force of Will actually deal bonus true damage, and that's based on the spell's actual damage. So we max W second. We used to max W second because it had a ramping slow, but they removed it, they nerfed it, but it's still W max second, because the more base damage this does, the more true damage we get out of it. So right now, it's going to give me 9 damage, but if I were to max this spell completely, it's going to be doing 26. So the more AP I get, the more base skill points I get in it, the more true damage it does, which makes it more valuable. And since it upgrades second, it gives us even more value for maxing it second, because if I were to max E second, which has no cooldown adjustments, gets 35 damage per rank, it's kind of irrelevant to max your E second. But if I put points into my W, I'm getting that ramping damage, and the cooldown also goes down, which is fantastic. Next up is going to be Scatter the Weak, which also has some really cool interactions. The way Scatter the Weak works is it sends out a cone, so it starts from here and slowly pushes out. And if it connects with a ball, it'll send that ball an additional distance that will then stun. So the cool thing is you can use it to gain vision of Fog of War. So if I were to cast this and hit a target, it'll reveal them inside the bush. And this is basically your bread and butter for trading. You always want to be playing around your QE. But the downside is this is your most important ability, so if I use my QE, I'm also at my weakest because I no longer have a stun. Now, there are some very interesting mechanics that you can do with this, and that has to do with the way that terrain works. So right now, if I were to cast my QE, my maximum range would be right about here. But because of the way the ball works inside of terrain, it'll send it to the closest open area. So if I cast my QE through the terrain, it'll fly all the way to the end instead of the minimum distance. So when you're doing some pretty specific chase routes, you can actually catch people off guard with a really insane long-range stun. And then if you utilize the double tap on the W, you can basically kill them from a very long range. So there's a couple walls that you can do this in. And sometimes it's kind of trial and error, because as you can see here, this doesn't go all the way through. But if I were to reposition, it would now go all the way through. You can also do it on this wall. Again, we're just going to line it up. And you can see here that there's a lot extra distance just from placing it at the correct spot. So getting used to all of these different terrain spots will make it a little bit easier for you to find some cool opportunities. But you can see a very big difference. This is an extra 200 to 300 units of range, just because you know how it can be done. Now, there is another mechanic that I would not recommend ever doing, but this is the EQ push. And the way the EQ push works is that this used to be a basic part of Syndra's kit, but when she got reworked, they removed it, and now this is an unintentional recreation. So the only replicatable way to do this is to have auto attack range showing on your auto attack, and then what you're going to do is line it up, you're going to E and then Q at the exact range distance. So even when I'm trying to do it with 100% replication, I'm going to mess it up. But the way this would work is that it's going to push the target, and then it'll stun afterwards, which would give you 2 instances of CC. Right there. Now, Scatter the Weak, once upgraded, gets a bigger cone, which makes it easier to push back enemies. And it also is a very cool interaction where the way it works is after the knockback has completed, the slow is applied. And it also applies to the stun. So once this stun runs out, then the slow starts. So if I land my QE at max range, I have an entire 1.25 seconds to follow up with a WQ on a slow target after the stun has ended. And I think that's probably pretty broken, and that's why they had to remove the 40% slow from Force of Will on top of the 70% slow from Scatter the Weak. But it makes it a lot easier to play Syndra, and I'm a big fan. Now, our ultimate ability, Unleash Power. Every time we put a skill point into our ultimate, we get 10 ability haste for our Q specifically, which makes it easier to get balls onto the battleground. And Syndra always has 3 balls flying around her. So if I ultimate with nothing else, I will always get a 3-ball ultimate that does the minimum amount of damage. So I can do that to set up a triple stun, and I can also get a 5-ball ult consistently every single time once I have my Q upgraded. Because right now, I have 2 charges, so what I would do is I would QE, WQ, and then ult, and that's a guaranteed 5-ball ultimate. But there's a way to consistently get a 6-ball ult every single time, the max being 7. You pretty much put a ball on the ground, you wait until your Q is about to be recharged, and then you can go ahead and just pick the ball up to reset, and then QE, WQ for 6-ball ult. And that's replicatable in pretty much every single part of the game once you've hit your level 7 upgrade. And I'll go and show you with cooldowns disabled. So what I would typically do is you can either place the ball behind the wall, or you can use your Q in lane, and then that way they get the idea that they're a little bit safer. And then as your Q is about to reset, you QE, WQR, and then it's a free 6-ball ultimate. I would never really aim for a 7-ball ultimate just because it's going to take a lot of time to set it up, and you need a certain amount of haste to actually have that option in the first place, and 6-ball ultimate will serve nicely. Now, once you've upgraded your ult, you will then execute enemies below 15% HP. Any single projectile from your ultimate that brings them below 15% will trigger the execute, So the more balls the better, because you have more chances to actually trigger that execute in case there's something like a shield or a heal that momentarily blocks that 15% damage. So we go ahead and full combo, and now I tap my ultimate, and then the target on every single projectile would be executed, which is great. And this is basically the most fun part of Syndra's kit, because you can miss all your spells and then press R on a target, and then bam, they're dead. And the final upgrade for Syndra is going to be 120 splinters, where she increases her ability power by 15%. So for this illustration, I have completed a full build for a standard versus squishy composition. I currently have 714 AP. So when I hit these targets and go up to 120, I go from 714 to 796. So I'm essentially getting 80 AP for absolutely free once I hit maximum amount of splinters. If we are looking for gameplay commentary, I have 300 plus videos on my channel, which are all educational gameplay commentary across a multitude of ranks. I'd say about 95% of them are Masters Plus, and 5% of them are low elo, and most of those are going to be about 2 years ago. So check out my latest videos if you want to watch gameplay commentary. Otherwise, thanks for watching. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments, and I'll get back to you. And like and subscribe. Thanks.